Hi, everyone. This is Samantha Rowe from SADA, and we're thrilled to welcome you to today's live stream webinar where you will once again meet the experts. Today, we have a very special guest, AODocs, who will show us how organizations can be more productive in Google Drive by building processes and centralizing ownership. At SADA, we design these weekly sessions to provide you with our deep expertise as we all work together in our remote environments, because there's always something we can learn using our collaboration tools in our daily lives. This series, called Sweet Bits, showcases our incredible SADA experts. Today, we will be hearing from one of our third-party product partners, AODocs. AODocs is the only document management solution built specifically for G Suite, giving enterprises a new way to collaborate on Google Drive with added security, control, and structure for all of your files and folders. You can submit questions to today's presenter at any point by clicking the link in the description below and typing your questions. We'll get to them at the end of the presentation. These recordings will be available following the live stream in our remote workforce hub known as Cloud Quarters, a new section of our website complete with a growing collection of productivity and collaboration resources just for you. I will talk more about it at the end of the session. I would now like to introduce our expert for today's session, Tony Majewski, Director of Business Development at AODocs. Take it away, Tony.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Samantha. Thank you much for having us on the Sweet Bit session. We're really excited to be here and to present. For those of you that aren't aware of what AODocs is, like Samantha had mentioned, we are the recommended document management system for G Suite. Our fun new term and market that Gartner and Forrester have given us is content services. So you might hear me reference that during the demo as well. It's okay if you don't know what that means because it's brand new. So what we really want to focus on today is a few core concepts, really to help organizations get the most out of their investment in G Suite and specifically Google Drive. So the things that we're going to focus on today, number one, a question that a lot of companies ask themselves and that I'll definitely have you guys ask yourselves is understanding what might not be in Google Drive yet for your organization. Some of the common ones that we come across are very complex and large scale file shares, SharePoint environments, cloud solutions like Box or Dropbox, or legacy content/document management systems like OpenText or Documentum or Laserfiche, and really understanding what's in those platforms today. Why hasn't your company brought that into Drive yet, right? We're going to talk about the benefits of centralized ownership and control over those critical business documents. We're going to talk about the advantages of using metadata schemas instead of massive folder structures. So a little bit of a change in mindset and the benefits that exist there. And then we're going to talk about building processes with AODocs. And we're actually going to show some demo examples of this about how you can build very quick, easy processes on top of and around your critical business documents, whether it's doc sheets, slides, PDFs, etc. So that being said, a little bit more about AODocs and who we are as a company and what we are as a platform. So we were founded in 2012, so we've been in this ecosystem for almost a decade, tightly integrated with G Suite, right? And we're a little bit different in the market, especially against our competitors in the sense that we bring a lot of functions into a single platform. So a very robust process and workflow engine, the ability to have full enterprise grade audit and traceability on everything that happens in the system, right? So that's going to be very relevant for organizations that might be in regulatory industries like life sciences or health services or manufacturing or financial services. Business connectors into solutions like DocuSign or Salesforce to help create a more consolidated environment. And then the ability to have low-code customization for your IT teams to be able to extend the platform out. For us to be considered a document management system, we have to be able to do what we would consider table stakes, right? Document lifecycle management, having a robust metadata model, being able to introduce granular permissions on your content in Drive. So at a subfolder level, at a workflow state level, being able to implement things like version control. And then, of course, making sure that it is completely integrated with that Google user experience, being able to give you that controlled collaboration that you get with Drive and the doc sheets and slides. And then, of course, the security and performance that comes with the fact that we're built in GCP and tightly integrated with G Suite. So for us to be a enterprise-grade content management platform, We need to be able to address multiple industries, right? So we've got a global customer base that fits all of these different verticals, right? Education, engineering, financial services, healthcare, manufacturing. A lot of the biggest companies that go G Suite are leveraging AODocs to meet very specific needs and then broad content management strategies. By no means are we a large scale focused company. We've got customers that are as small as 5 users, 500 users, up to over 100,000 users. Within a company, departmental solutions, right? So you might represent a specific department like legal, accounting, human resources. We've got processes and out of the box functions that can address each of these needs, and we'll cover some of that in the demo. The question about what's not in Drive today, right? So a question you guys can ask yourselves, your colleagues, your IT team, what typically doesn't move well into a native Drive environment? Complex SharePoint environments. Lotus, there's still surprising amounts of Lotus out there. There's a reason HCL paid over $1 billion for Lotus. And then the legacy ECM, OpenText, Laserfish, on-base niche software like contract management, quality management, HR document management, and then hyper complex file shares, large scale file shares. And then there's certain file types that may not fit into doc sheets or slides, right? Something with highly sensitive information or regulatory requirements, information that requires granular permissions, files that are tied to workflow, and then potentially macro heavy Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, right? A lot of times people bake process and workflow into those macros. So we can help move the process out of the document and into G Suite while taking advantage of doc sheets and slides, something that we really see a lot on the Excel front specifically. So in the demo, we're going to talk about centralized ownership of your business documents. So how do you consolidate that strategy? How do you use Drive as that single repository? Get rid of the file shares, get rid of SharePoint, get rid of a niche solution or an ECM platform. Leveraging metadata, understanding that yes, it's very beneficial for search and retrieval, but metadata can also drive business outcomes, right? And then that's going to be tied to how we can help on the workflow front as well. So AODocs can be a no-code platform, or it can be a low-code platform to develop out these use cases. So that being said, let's go ahead and jump into some live examples. All right, so I'm in a demo environment. I'm going to have two different personas here that we're going to talk about, but I'm going to start with our user, Sam. Right? Because we're tightly integrated with G Suite means we're fully integrated with that Google identity, right? So you're able to take advantage of users, groups as it relates to permissions, and you can even dial it up to do hyper-specific roles if you need to, right? So this looks and feels like Drive because it is Drive. And AODocs is going to layer in some nice to haves for the overall user experience. So AODocs has their own library structure, representative of folders in this case. And we've got a drop down. So this is going to show you all of the libraries that your business has implemented with AODocs and given you access to. There's an out of sight, out of mind policy as it relates to having access to information and even visibility, right? So there's no door marked private if you don't have access to something that you have curiosity about, you request access for. You just don't have that level of visibility. These are searchable as well. You can designate favorites. And then for companies that are moving over from file shares, there's a lot of questions around complexity of folder structure. How do we maintain that? How do we maintain permissioning at a subfolder level? So in this case, one of the really common examples for us is an HR environment, right? HR in this case, we want to manage our employee files. We might want to manage our corporate policies. We might be managing incident reporting. We want these to live in the same environment, but we know that inside this environment, there's going to be granular permissions that are required. So here you can see we've got different employees. Mary should not have access to Tony's files, right? But HR should have full visibility. So AODocs introduces the ability to implement that granularity at the subfolder and the file level. You can also see that we've put controls on the files and folders themselves. So in this case, we've put a policy in place that even a member of the HR team, in this case, Sam, doesn't have the ability to delete folders or files out of the environment. So added layers of control over the Drive environment, put those enterprise grade controls in place Yes, we can allow delete. We can allow soft delete that goes to a library-based trash can. If we want to leverage templating, we can do that as well. So we can copy folder trees over. If we want to copy certain files that need to come over every single time, we'll be able to do those types of things. So this is very basic, right? And you can also see that Atlantic Labs is our storage account. This owns all of the files and folders in this environment. So if someone in the HR team leaves, but they've added a bunch of files into the environment, we don't have to do an ownership transfer of those files. They stay in this environment, and we still maintain the full audit and traceability of who created, who modified, right? So you're able to maintain all of that. So this is what I would consider very simple, basic concepts. This is going to be the centralized management of the files, all file types that are supported in Drive, the granular controls, the granular permissions. Now I'm going to switch over to the AODocs user interface, right? A lot of people will ask us, why do you have a separate interface from Drive? And this is really going to tie back to the question of those companies that haven't moved something like SharePoint or Lotus or OpenText into Drive, because there's certain expected behaviors of the content management system. So here you can see that we're taking that same quote unquote simple environment from Drive, and now we're layering in custom views where we can now see metadata, and where the metadata can be searchable, and we can have defined filters, and we can do full text search on the files themselves, right? So we're able to do that. If we want to create targeted views, we can, right? So the views pre-search for us. There can also be security behind the views, right? So we're able to do all of those things. And of course, we can still create new HR documents. We can attach, we can do an upload and convert. We can create a organically new G Suite file, a doc sheet, or a slide, right? So the second that we do that, we know that it's owned by the organization because it's created in this environment. And there's a lot that we can embed in these cases, right? So in this case, with these documents, if we want to embed enterprise grade retention and disposition for information governance, we can do that as well. All right, now pivoting over more to the concept of workflow, right? So I'm going to go into the AODocs library landing page. So think of this as the AODocs version kind of the Drive interface, right? And so here you can see, we've got all of our libraries tagged. We can have nested tags. So here's some demo examples that cover AI machine learning use cases. We have legal, life sciences, quality, right? So we can keep those departmental. In this case, I want to look for a specific library. We can also sort by last time access. We can do a grid view. We can sort by libraries where I have workflow tasks pending based on the user that's logged in. So in this case, I want to go to a library that's built out to do RFP publications, to draft non-disclosure agreements and execute them, and kick off contracts. So these landing pages are completely customizable. In this case, you can see that we put in a workflow visualization for the NDA. We see the recent activity, so a glimpse into that enterprise grade audit log. And then I've got a workflow basket that, again, is going to be tied back to the user that's logged in, right? So I can see all of the information that's tied into this user, Sam. I can see that I have 19 non-disclosure agreements that are currently in a draft state, right? And then we have all the views. So in this case, we've got a ton of different ways to visualize the files that are managed in Drive and controlled by AODocs, right? And so I'm going to click into this supplier view. And again, this is going to be unique to AODocs in this case, and this is going to tie back to why someone would potentially keep something in SharePoint or Lotus, right? So what we're looking at here are pure data objects. So if you're familiar with SharePoint, you're probably familiar with list objects. This is feature parity for a SharePoint list object. This is nothing but data with no file attached to it completely, right? So it's the supplier information, it's the signee, it's the address, it's where the supplier exists, right? So pure data object. I could have attachments here. I could have multiple attachments to this record. In this case, I've got relations to non-disclosure agreements as well as email communications for this vendor, because we can capture email as well. So in this case, I want to run through a process where I want to execute a new non-disclosure agreement for this supplier, right? So I'm going to click this create related document icon, the little chain link. I'm going to come down and I'm going to go to the NDA section. I'm going to click NDA. You can see that a Google Doc is referenced here because we're going to pre-attach a template. So I click non-disclosure agreement. Here it brings me to a simple form entry field. So this is all of the metadata that we've configured for this specific document type. So what is the effective date, right? Here you can see that we have mandatory properties. So if I go to click save, it's going to say, nope, you still need to fill in more information. So making sure that your users work within the enterprise controls, how you guys operate as a business, right? So expiration date, supplier, again, very similar to SharePoint concepts around nested categories and term store. So here I can search into that category. In this case, I could click a nested value if I wanted to. And then here we have the signee information. So I'm going to leave these two intentionally blank, and I'm just going to fill out the internal signee. And so here you can see that we're using a person field to designate who the email is for that specific person. So being able to integrate with that Google identity, you can have multi-value fields as well if you have multiple signers in this case, and you can also use Google Groups here. Here you can see that an attachment's already here, the template non-disclosure agreement. So when I go to click save, a few things are going to happen for me, right? Number one, it's 2020. I shouldn't have to rely on memory or a piece of paper duct taped to my desk or cube, or now that we're all working from home, the kitchen counter, to enforce a file naming convention, right? So here we've configured AODocs to take the available information and create a file naming convention. If we need to generate something like a contract ID or a vendor ID, we can configure that as well. And then here's the Google Doc, right? So I didn't have to go into the most recent version that I leveraged. I know that legal has the most recent version of this non-disclosure agreement available to me. And then here's my metadata that I collected on the right. So what do I have to do now to draft this non-disclosure agreement? I could just go in and fill in the information, or thanks to AODocs' integration with the Docs APIs, I could click this update attachment button, and we're actually going to take that metadata and push it into the placeholders that we defined, right? So this is a very simple example of document assembly. Very simple. Metadata value, pushing it into the placeholder. We can also do advanced versions of this, of taking actual pre-approved blocks of text and applying them into placeholders. And because we're using Docs APIs, those aren't a one-time push. Those can be dynamic. So if the data changes over time, we can update that data in the document. We can do the same exact thing for Google Sheets. We can do the same exact thing for slide decks as well, for automating things like asset management for sales, being able to automatically generate a sales deck. So in this case, I've done my job. I pressed a button and it built the NDA for me. Now I want to submit it for approval. So here we have a workflow button. These can be completely tailored to how your business speaks to each other, right? How do your coworkers speak to each other? So in this case, simply, I just need to submit this. Here you can see that we've enforced a comment being mandatory, so I can explain why I'm submitting it. So here you can see that we've customized the text to say, please include any additional notes here. This is configurable. In this case, we're just going to enforce politeness. So I'm just going to say, please review to my manager, and I'm going to submit this out, right? So some more automation here. We're going to enforce the file naming convention now at the file level, right? So we've actually renamed the file to match the container. You can see that we're in an NDA review state. If I wanted to check where we're at in the process, I could click this workflow visualization icon and see where we're at and what's next, right? We can also change the permissions on the document to make sure that I can no longer edit it or even put it into comment mode, right? So you're able to put those levels of control to where they're automated and it's not related on user intervention. So I'm going to move over to an approver view. And here you can see that I've received an email that's asking me to review a document, right? And so you're able to configure these to look and feel however you want, include whatever information that's relevant. Here, this says attachment, right? It looks like an attachment. If it was an attachment, if it was a parallel copy, it would be the worst document management system in the world, right? So this is actually referencing back to that singular version that's in Drive. So now, what does that mean as the approver? That means that I can get this email via Gmail on my mobile device, my tablet, my Chromebook, my laptop. If you're still using a desktop, absolutely, right? And you can see that Sam's in the document. I'm in the document. If I'm on mobile and I want to make changes, open it up in the Docs app, make my changes, make my comments. Here you can see via AODocs, we're also introducing the workflow and the metadata into the Docs UI, right? So I could approve it or refuse it from here. If I refuse it, you can see that the comment's required, right? I have to tell Sam why I'm sending it back to him, or if I approve it. We also push something called breadcrumbs, so I know exactly where the file lives inside of Drive, right? It lives in that library. If it's in a subfolder, it shows that as well. If I go back to the email, you'll see that I've got my workflow actions here as well, right? So I can take this from email. If you're using the AODocs mobile app, it'll refer you to the AODocs mobile app where you can take those workflow actions as well, right? So being able to quickly take action, quickly take any specific edit action on a file, and then send it back. So in this case, we'll just approve it and we'll say looks good, right? So we've quickly approved a document, a contract, a non-disclosure agreement, a vendor agreement, an MSA, whatever it needs to be. Let's go back to Sam now. Let's reload this page. And again, we're going to automatically move it to the next state. We can use the metadata to drive any decision trees as well, right? So here we're now in the NDA execution state. We've got our comment history. We've got our transition history, right? So if you're doing things like ISO audits, this is what you're looking for from a document control perspective, right? So in this case now, we could automatically send it to something like DocuSign or Adobe Sign, but we might want to give that decision back to the user that drafted the document, right? Some people want a physical signature, right? So maybe we need to convert to PDF and then make it downloadable, right? But in this case, we'll send for signature via our DocuSign integration, and then we'll send it to the people that we've defined in the metadata of who needs to sign it, right? So if I go back, just for the sake of us being in a demo, I'm not going to run through the full DocuSign process, but I'll just show you one that I filled out earlier, right? So this is from earlier this afternoon. So we're in an active state. How did we determine it was active? Because number one, it was signed. And number two, we're living between the effective date and expiration date, right? So this is where metadata becomes valuable beyond just search. It's actually driving business process, right? 30 days from expiration, we're going to automatically send an email to these two people, the external vendor, as well as the internal person that's responsible for the non-disclosure agreement. And then if we go into the documents themselves, the attachments, you can see that the draft version, we have it in a view-only state. I can't modify this. I shouldn't be able to. It's an active NDA. And then here, we can see the signed version that DocuSign automatically handed back to us, right? So there's no multi-step process for me to go into DocuSign, download the attachment, and then re-upload it into the document management system, right? We want this to be very beneficial for the user. We want to save time, right? We've got a customer over in Europe. They're an agriculture conglomerate. They started with procurement. They started with legal. They started with HR. Combined with G Suite and AODocs, they saved over 3 million euros year one. And they saved hours, upwards of 60 to 100 hours per employment in those departments because they just implemented simple process controls with AODocs on top of Google Drive, right? So that's a very simple process. We can go complex. We've got customers that are doing things like capital expenditure requests. We've got some customers that are running all of their new product development out of AODocs. We've got life sciences companies that have done validated quality management, something that is not typically what you'd see in Drive, right? But AODocs makes that possible, right? So again, just some simple examples here. If I wanted to search for all the documents that I was responsible for with an expiration date after June 1st, I can quickly leverage that information, right? So very simple process, covered some of the basics. That's really what we wanted to cover today. We can obviously go way more in depth. I'm notorious in this company for being very long-winded and just talking for days about how much I love this platform and this market. So, we can definitely engage with SADA on any questions that you might have specifically. So that being said, we'll transition back to the deck and cover any specific questions that you might have.
That was Amazing. Thank you so much, Tony. It looks like we do have a couple questions. So let's see. First, how do you handle migrations from systems like SharePoint, specifically some of the objects like lists where there may not be files attached or multiple files attached to a single list object?
That is a fantastic question. So in that specific scenario, we covered actually how we have the feature parity for the lists. We actually have a migration tool called M4A, Migrate for AODocs, that has native connectors into SharePoint that actually brings over all those files with the metadata, with the versions in the proper manner. If it's list objects, it recreates them and migrates them over in AODocs, right? So we have a tool that's specifically able to bring those SharePoint environments, the on-premise, the SharePoint online, and bring it into Google Drive with AODocs. So that's really how we handle that. And SADA is actually one of our certified partners in assessing and running those migrations, right, with AODocs.
Awesome. Looks like we have another question. Does this work with Google Forms?
Yes, we actually have a Google Form connector. So you can create a Google form that mirrors the AODocs form that we filled out. So if you need to capture data, if you need to capture files, if someone wants to pull up the form on their phone and maybe attach files or photos from their form to trigger a workflow, things like work orders, incident requests, employee requests, yes, 100%, absolutely.
Awesome. Do you offer any pre-made templates for workflows?
That is a great question as well. Yes. So in AODocs, if you go in and install, you can actually have templates that are specific to things like contract management or policy and procedure publication. Probably our highest volume use case across all of our customers is that publication workflow for policy documents. So you can have a fully functional workflow with metadata in about 2 minutes just by going into our template library and clicking create new.
Cool. Do you recommend people use AODocs instead of shared drives?
So this is an interesting question from that we actually get a lot from our customers. It's really not one or the other, right? Shared drives is a really, really good tool within Google Drive for use cases that are appropriate for shared drives, right? Team collaboration. There's certain considerations around permissions and scale. We have a ton of customers that are using shared drives and AODocs in conjunction, right? AODocs for the critical files, AODocs for the high volumes of files that may exist, AODocs for the business processes and the workflows. But by no means do we recommend one or the other. We do think that those two environments can absolutely coexist together. We just help you kind of define what that content strategy needs to look like.
Do you have consultants available to help assess and implement workflows?
Absolutely. And this is actually another area where SADA being an AODocs certified partner comes into play. So there's a pretty good number of the members of SADA's team that are able to work with you on determining how AODocs can help, number one, and then implementing AODocs to support those processes, content strategies, retention strategies, migration strategies, right? So we actually lean pretty heavily on SADA to answer that question.
Okay, one last final question. Do you have any hard limits on folders and files like shared drives?
Another good question. So I believe the most recent number is 440,000 files and folders in a single shared drive environment. So that hard requirement doesn't actually exist in AODocs. We have some soft recommendations in how we designate the total file volume for an AODocs storage account, which again is a company, an organization drive account. So we don't actually physically own your files, your company does. So a lot of that is outlined on our knowledge base, support.aodocs.com, which is a beautifully maintained environment by our wonderful team. And if you have any specific questions around kind of guidance for volume migrations, volume of files day forward. Again, we're more than happy to work with SADA to answer any specific questions around that.
Great. It looks like that's all the questions we have. I just want to say thank you, Tony, for walking us through that demo. It was really awesome to see. And thank you everyone for joining our live stream webinar, Building Processes Within Google Drive with our partner AODocs. Don't forget to check out our remote workforce hub, Cloud Quarters, for upcoming live streams and webinars. There's also a ton of resources working from home in this new environment that you can go and watch previous on-demand webinars as well. This one will also be up there following today's live stream. You'll also receive an email from us with a link to Cloud Quarters, which will include a recording of this live stream and relevant information to help you maximize your productivity and collaboration in your remote working environment. We'll also include a link to a survey where you can provide feedback or ask any additional questions or suggest future live stream ideas. On behalf of myself, the team at SADA and AODocs, thank you so much for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.